The atmosphere within the palace walls could be cut with a blunt knife. 100 eyes of nobles, kings, lords of the great houses, the emperor himself, all within these crisp marble white halls. 3 younglings stand ready in front of the emperor, guarded by his oversized lizardmen paladins. The court stood in silence, waiting for the emperor to begin proceedings. The 3 younglings, adventurers by trade, stood patiently, waiting for the emperor to begin. Jacqueline, a tall and imposing mountain elf, normally stoic and calm, was trembling slightly. Ceres, a short but nimble forest elf, was very wary of her situation, blushing wildly as she desperately wished she wore more than just her hunter's garb that revealed just a bit too much for polite company. And finally, Wartak, a fledgling minotaur, barely grown into his horns, stood to vigilant attention with his war axe holstered on his back, so as not to agitate the guards. The silence in the room was broken by the emperor suddenly taking a deep breath. "Apprentices of the Fighters Guild, you are summoned here to explain the mess you created." The emperor's voice was not one of jubilation. It made all 3 of those assembled tremble in fear. He was not amused. "Mess, my emperor?" Jacqueline spoke, her voice trembling in terror. Ceres, always looking up to her dark-skinned companion, nearly wet herself from the fear radiating from her companion. "Yes!" The emperor's voice boomed loudly, practically shaking the palace foundations. "While it cannot be denied by anyone that the service you rendered onto us by destroying the Dark Lord and routing the treacherous wench Kalthar from my kingdom, the fact of the matter remains that the means by which you accomplished this task is concerning." He growled that last word out. Could you be more specific?" Wartak asked, his normally gravelly voice now a mildly humiliating squeak. "Assassinating an Imperial envoy at Warwalker's Pass, to start." The Emperor's voice echoed through the hall. The silence was so deafening, he could be heard even outside the palace grounds. After a few moments of terror, Jacqueline finally found the courage to speak up. She cleared her throat loudly, perhaps too loudly. "We were staying for a rest at the Warwick Inn during an adventure. Out of curiosity, we entered his room and found this." Jacqueline reached into her satchel and retrieved a piece of cloth with a strange symbol on it. It radiated dark energy, forcing the assembled crowd to gasp in response. The Emperor scratched his hairy chin. Wartak continued. "We confronted him with this information and he attacked us immediately. He was not able to get very far, as by the time he began conjuring a spell towards us, my axe was already buried in his spine." Wartak beamed a smile of pride at this statement. "We searched his person and his room for more information, and found more damning evidence against him. Noting he was meeting with subordinates at Warwalker's Pass, we went there and were able to take a prisoner. After some interrogation, we handed him over to the city guard," Ceres said, still blushing. The Emperor considered the information and took a deep breath, licking his lips. He spoke further with greater emphasis. "The destruction of the Farantus Watchtower at Hag's End." "We came upon the tower already destroyed while returning to the city. A plague beast attacked it and we entered the fray like any citizen would. Master Arantino of the Mages Guild was there, and with him the beast was driven back with prejudice. Wartak dealt it a killing blow," Ceres said in turn, her voice gaining a modicum of courage. The Emperor squinted his eyes at the scantily clad elf girl in response. "And the Battle of Crow's Rest. The battle where an entire legion of Baron Harbinger's troops was slaughtered." Wartak spoke this time, with more strength in his tone. "We were at that battle. It was a slaughter. The Dark Lord employed a Death Knight to destroy the town of Redhall. Master Martino the Brave and Baron Harbinger both lost their lives evacuating the town, but Ceres scored the killing blow against the Death Knight that caused it. Everyone looked at Ceres in response. This tiny little elf girl killed a Death Knight? The Emperor raised an eyebrow at her. "It was just dumb luck, okay?" she squeaked, staring at the room. "I was being attacked by a skeleton. I panicked and missed him. The arrow bounced off him and hit the Death Knight in the eye. After that lucky shot, the horse collapsed and the fight was over. It took us 2 days to bury the bodies," Jacqueline said, her voice breaking from sorrow. The Emperor cast his gaze upon Ceres. "The burning of Eldenor Forest. Enlighten me." "Well, we... Ceres trailed off, her eyes now focused on another object in the corner. Jacqueline assumed she had become too nervous and spoke in turn. "Well, that's kind of embarrassing, really. An apprentice mage asked us to test a spell he was working on. It failed. That mage is now receiving the biggest chewing out in the world," Jacqueline said with a smirk. This made the Emperor half chuckle, half scoff. If it was a simple accident, then we can smooth things out with the local magical creatures. Mages should be able to regrow the forest with ease. Now, what about the Dragon Kingdoms? You will have to ask Sir Eleanor and Sir Reginald for that information. We were never privy to anything happening with the Dragon Kingdoms, Wartak responded in earnest, his chest out and proud, now having regained his courage. Ceres was now fully ignorant of the world around her, jaw agape at the sight of something. A guard, annoyed that his Emperor's presence was being ignored, moved forward and stood by her. Normally, a girl like Ceres would be terrified at the close proximity of one of the king's lizard men, but she remained distracted. The guard followed her line of sight, and what he saw nearly made him drop his warpike. The Emperor remained undaunted and continued. "And the massacre at Thornbreaker. Care to explain that?" "We were at the inn there and a bandit raid hit the town. There were a lot of them. Maybe 7 different clans attacked at once. Overran the guards. Wiped the town out completely. Casualties were due to their sheer numbers." Wartak proudly brandished his war axe with a smirk. "They took a long time to die," he said with a hearty laugh, like a true warrior. Ceres and the paladin's proximity was now noticed by several bystanders, and several beastmen wandered over to try to separate them. It was very well known that lizardmen have an all too great fondness of elf women, so several of Wartak's brethren were slowly making their way closer to try to separate the pair, only to stop dead in their tracks on laying their eyes on the distraction. What the fuck?" Ceres said. "What did you just say?" The Emperor angrily bellowed at the utterance of a curse word in his presence. Ceres and the crowd all pointed at what they were looking at. Lo and behold, a monk of some kind was standing upside down, his feet on the ceiling, performing some kind of jig dance. Silence followed as the entire room now sat fixed on the creature. It appeared a bit like an elf, only with a mid-level complexion and short hair. His ears were small and rounded. He wore a mixture of metallic armor and a dark leather cape, trimmed with gold and purple. After a few moments, the creature stopped his dance and smiled at the assembled crowd. He took an inaudible deep breath with a strange smirk. Suddenly, several dozen copies of him appeared out of magical doors, all over the walls and ceiling, as if he had suddenly made 100 clones and sent them through 100 magical portals. Then they all simultaneously began to boisterously erupt in song. "Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Belt soft, trousers down, isn't life a scream? Ha!" The copies of the creature vanished back into their portals, and a deafening silence followed. The creature slowly began to float in a seemingly random direction, and let out a gleeful whee as it floated into a wall. vanished, then instantly appeared floating out of another wall. Several minutes of solid silence followed, as the crowd watched the strange being float around the room, harmlessly bouncing off walls, making strange noises as he did. He seemed completely oblivious to the room around him, and even appeared out of the floor several times, as if he were using himself as a ball in a game, gently floating around, letting the wall just ping him away. "Whee!" it said, and happily continued to bounce for a few more minutes until eventually settling in front of the Emperor, where it produced a chair with a snap of its fingers and sat on it, still floating in the air. "Who or what in Oblivion's name are you?" the Emperor asked, albeit far too politely for the circumstances. "Who? Me? Me, you say? Oh, right, sorry. I was having way too much fun," he chuckled, and moved off his seat into the center of the throne room. He cleared his throat, loudly, somewhat obnoxiously. A sudden burst of holy divine light erupted from his form. Massive wings jutted from his back of brilliant gold and silver, now proudly flapping in the wind, and a holy aura of divine greatness emanated from him, as his strange monk robe vanished, and was replaced with sparkling golden armor. "Bow before me, for I am God," he bellowed loudly. The room saturated in brilliant holy light. The light suddenly dimmed, his form returned to normal, and he sat back in his chair without a care in the world. Jacqueline spoke now, having regained her composure. "Pardon me, but may I ask some questions?" The creature moved around in front of her, slightly high up so he was looking down at everyone. "Sure, why not? What's up, gorgeous?" he said, smiling wryly at the elven woman. The Emperor got a little flustered. "I am the Emperor here. I will be spoken to." "Oh, really? Well then, pleasure to meet you. The name's Fred. I was a human, now I am a god," he responded in kind, and aggressively shook the Emperor's hand. So aggressively, the Emperor nearly fell off his throne. The Emperor looked at his arm after the firm handshake, after he got himself back on his throne. He gasped at the sight of his 800-year-old careworn arm, now looked like it was when he was but a lad. "Oh my! How? Why?" It was the Emperor's turn to be confused. "Well, first we start with introductions. My name is Fred. Yours is?" he asked. "My name is Emperor Juib Sardonius the 31st. This is Ceres, and there is Wartak and Jacqueline, adventurers, who I now notice are standing way too close to my guards." The Emperor looked at Ceres and his paladin. Everyone nearby suddenly found their opening, and moved Ceres away from the paladin, then ushered him back to his station. "How was that?" Fred asked, finishing his tea. Lizardmen and elves have this thing, and, Ceres blushed from the thought of the unconventional relationship. She was vaguely attempting to explain. "Ah, I get it. Some strange quirk of nature makes it so elves produce some kind of pheromone or scent that lizardmen find irresistible. That's hilarious." Fred laughed a bit, and he floated up into the air while chuckling, still holding his teacup. "So, why are you here?" Wartak said. "Well, there were these dudes called humans, right? They fought, they bled, they were born, they existed, they died, blah blah blah. Then they left their home planet and went into the stars to colonize the universe. Then, after a couple thousand years, discovered the secrets of the universe, sometimes through less than savory means, and ascended into godhood to create and lord over their own custom-made planes of existence. I am one of those humans that did the whole ascending to godhood thing. Pleasure to meet you," he said, tipping his cup to the crowd. So, you created us?" one of the bystanders asked. "No, I'm just here. My own created universe ran its course, so I'm wandering around universe to universe. I like stories. Universes tell many stories, and there are many, many, many universes and planes of existence. So, Anything you need? He asked, rather nonchalantly. Jacqueline jumped at the offer. We lost two of our greatest warriors in a battle with a Death Knight, Master Martino the Brave and Baron Harbinger. Is there any way you can bring them back? Yep, Fred said. Fred snapped his fingers. With a loud pop, the kind you hear when a balloon explodes, Master Martino the Brave and Baron Harbinger appeared in the room, landing on the floor with a loud metallic clunk. The two men stood up, rubbing their heads. They looked around the room and then at their own forms. Where did I go just now? Martino said, as he quizzically scratched his head. I have no idea, but that guy over there is floating. On a chair. What? Baron Harbinger pointed at Fred the God. Hey guys, welcome back to the land of the living. Please wipe your feet, Fred said with a hearty laugh. There you go, Baron von Beefcake and Chapboy the Stronk. Living large. The Emperor by this point was flabbergasted to oblivion. Mouth agape, face pale, and trapped in a petrified mid-gasp. Fred took the opportunity to look around and settled his gaze on Ceres. He reached out with a finger and gently tapped her on her tiny elven nose. Boop! Ceres blushed and couldn't stop herself from smiling. Why did you do that? Universal law. Laws that even gods have to obey. Unilaw number 27. If you seize the cute, boop the snoot. It matters not what universe it is a constant, he stated simply, and floated to a spot in front of the Emperor. The room remained in silence for a bit, as Fred resumed sipping some tea that he magicked out of nowhere. How could one respond to this situation exactly? A literal god, who seems way too happy to be here, suddenly appears in your home and brings back two dead men in front of your eyes, and performs miracles the best of mages could only dream of. My Lord Fred, I have a question. Wartak broke the silence. So ask it. Don't call me Lord. I hate that grovelly, snivelly shit. Gives me the heebie-jeebies. Oh, Fred, sir. How exactly does one attain your kind of godliness? Wartak asked, seemingly genuinely curious. Oh, there's plenty of ways. Step 1, fix your planet. Step 2, leave your home planet. Step 3, spend a few thousand years building civilization across the galaxy. Step 4, try not to get yourselves killed within that time. Step 5, you have 6 options, which are as follows. Quantum entanglement cascade reaction inside of a micro-quasar, caused by a Matryoshka brain. Entry into the Shroud, a dimension of nightmares and dreams where you are literally consumed by an all-encompassing power between universes. Uploading oneself, one's people, or an entire species into a quantum computational network inside of a planetary computing complex, then get lost to the quantum foam of life. Attain supreme power in mastery of magic and cast an immense cascade ritual and ascend into the ether with all magics. Or simply through brute force, refusing to die no matter how hard the universe tries to kill you, and figure out a way to break through the chaos matrix. Or do what I did. Ascend to divinity through hard work, discipline, meditation, knowledge, and contemplation, Fred said, with a smile, and sipped more of his tea. Oh, I didn't understand any of that, but thanks. Wartak responded with a sheepish grin. You will, given time, patience, and a shot at the future, you will. The great filter comes to us all. Only the truly great will survive it, and only the truly masterful will overcome it. Any species that survives evolution, survives subsequent attempts at extinction by various factors, including disease, war, famine, or hardship, passes the first 2 filters. Any species that leaves their home planet for more than a year passes the 3rd. Any species that establishes a presence on another world survives the 4th. The rest of the galaxy's occupants, or lack thereof, are your 5th and final filter, he said, smiling at the crowd. Okay, thanks. We will, get on that, Jacqueline said sheepishly. Nobody really knew how to respond to any of this. Several moments of silence passed while everyone waited for Fred to finish his tea. Fred loudly slurped his beverage, finishing it shortly thereafter. First, however, I noticed something about you. Massively diverse. I count 17 distinct species here. But there is something that troubles you all. Something awful. Something that is ostensibly your first filter. Trogs, Fred said. That name filled all in the room with a mixture of hatred, fear, and revulsion. Jacqueline shuddered in disgust and retched a bit. Ceres ducked behind Wartak in fear at the sound of it. The room filled with a collective mixture of gasps, boos, and curse words at the mere utterance of the most vile creature in all the lands. Wow, interesting response. Never had that before. So, I have a bargain for you, and I shall rid the world of them. I shall be happy to pass for your sake the first of the great filters if you do something for me, he said, and stood on the floor in front of the Emperor. Name it. It is yours, the Emperor replied in turn. Slavery. I find the concept by itself to be unforgivable. Send any who dare practice it to the headman's axe. Release all who are in bondage, and swear on the graves of your ancestors to devote your time to stamping the vile practice out wherever you find it. Fred's eyes glowed red with hatred at the utterance of these words. The Emperor, looking somewhat small in his throne as Fred's eyes glazed red with rage, could only squeak at Fred in response. Okay, sir. Please don't eat me. Fred looked somewhat surprised at the reply. He steadied himself and stepped away, realizing he had scared people. Whoops, sorry, got a little angry there. So, gonna do it or not? Well, of course. I'm going to have to call in favors and make some new enemies, but it can be done. Would be easier if you helped. No, your problems are your own. I have already agreed to help you with something. Trogs for slaves, that's the deal. Fred stared the Emperor dead in the eyes as he said this. A light noise, followed by a slightly foul stench, followed from the Emperor, as Fred got too close for comfort. Yes, sir, will do, sir. No problem, sir. Don't eat me, sir. The Emperor hastily gabbled to placate the literal god standing in front of him. So, we have a deal. Abolition of slavery in exchange for the extermination of the Trog. Be right back, Fred said, and vanished. With God suddenly gone from the room, a feeling of relief washed over everyone. The Emperor scrambled out of his chair to his administrative room to fetch his good parchment. The Emperor returned, clutching various papers and an ink and quill. In front of everyone, assembled, he began to hastily write a new law. All of the noblemen in the chamber went forward to sign their names to it and make it law. Moments after the writ was signed, stamped and dated, Fred once again appeared. A clang was heard after his arrival, making Ceres squeal like a piglet in terror, and she began to crawl over poor Wartak at the sight of a Trog trapped in a cage that was too small for it. The hideous, many-armed mongrel, beast of red skin, sharp horns, long claws, and sharp tail, was a horrifying sight to all present. The women in the court instinctively hid behind any man they could find, and the men all drew their blades. Jacqueline, stoic and brave, squealed and jumped into Martino the Brave's arms. Yep, nasty things. Evolution really pulled a shitty move of these things. Razor-sharp claws that can tear through armor. Massive numbers due to overbreeding. Incapacity for reason or logic. A taste for flesh of both the carnal and edible variety. And they stink like a sewage treatment plant that's been lived in by zombified skunks. Highly dense bone structure, heavily armored musculature, high speed and high maneuverability. They sort of look like zombified versions of oversized goblins. Nasty, Fred said, as he examined the fetid beast. Here, the Emperor said, handing the newly written law to Fred. Fred looked at it for a time, scrutinizing it. Handwriting good, grammar and spelling good, parchment quality good, payment accepted. I will just take one for my records. Fred waved his hand, and a perfect copy of the parchment appeared. He grabbed the copy and put it in his pocket. Fred moved to the centre of the room, holding aloft the Trog in its cage. He hovered above the air and began to transform into his holy form. Golden wings sprouted from his back. His eyes glowed a magnificent deep purple, and his robes changed to holy metal gilded armour. He chanted something in a language too foreign for anyone to determine, not even the mages, and with a loud yell he slammed the Trog in its cage into the floor. "Bully, go splat!" He slammed the creature into the floor. The cage shattered, flattening the creature in a shower of blood and guts. At the instant of impact, a black portal of oblivion and infinity appeared underneath it, sucking the remains into the maw. More portals of smaller size opened up on every available flat surface. The assembled crowd hid behind any cover they could find and peered terrified at the sight. Trogs, all of them in cages, began appearing out of the smaller portals and slammed into an invisible floor, shattering the cages and killing their occupants, before vanishing into the jaws of oblivion. This continued for a few minutes as every Trog on the surface of the world was sucked out of its home, regardless of its location or circumstances, put into an abnormally small cage, and then cast into a void of infinity. The crowd slowly began to emerge and applaud the extinction of a disgusting beast. Noblemen and peasants alike emerging from their hiding places with thunderous uproar. After a few more minutes, the portal closed and Fred returned to his conjured chair with a cup of tea. "Done! All gone! Down to the very last! You're welcome. Now, as per our agreement, I will be back in 1 year to make absolutely sure you held your end of the bargain." Fred approached the Emperor yet again. "I am a man of my word. I am the Emperor, and my word is law. You don't need to threaten me." Emperor Jewip, suddenly regaining a fraction of his dignity, stood to face Fred as an equal. "Awesome! I'ma stick around for a bit. You know, I like this place. Seems pretty nice. You know, Trogs excluded, of course. Now, would thee be so kind as to point me towards your nearest tavern? If your beer is as good as I am told, I might be persuaded to stick around and be slightly more helpful," Fred said to the crowd with a sly smile.